Congratulations on such an accomplishment. Completely can relate to your story there. But I am curious, how did you come with the name of the book?
Oh, yeah, so the initial title for this was not Beautiful Country, it was something else. And then my agent said it's good to go with, something, my initial title was too long and actually didn't make a whole lot of sense. So we tried to come up with some other alternates. And Beautiful Country was a title on both of our lists as we brainstormed. And so it's actually a direct translation of the Chinese word for America, which is 美国. And we thought that it perfectly encapsulated the ironies of how America is seen on the international stage, what draws so many immigrants to move here, and then some of the contradictory realities that immigrants find once they are here.
Hi, thank you for being here. So much of what you've said has resonated so deeply with me. I'm just curious to hear a little bit about the rapport you had with your editor, what that process was like, the struggles, the way in which maybe they shifted the work from what you had originally drafted.
Again, I was very lucky. I had an editor that I worked really well with. And again, I think it was really fortunate that my book was already written, because when we had that initial call, she showed that she saw through the text what I was trying to do. And that in turn shaped her vision for shepherding it through to publication. So we didn't actually change a whole lot. There were times where I had to have frank conversations with her about how, so the blurb on the jacket, how that was written. We had very, boundary drawing conversations, not because she crossed any boundaries, but because we wanted to be very careful with how this book was marketed, like using the word illegal was something that we really wanted to make sure we did not do. That undocumented was, or without status were the terms that we would use.
Yes.
And I, again, was lucky that I ended up with an editor who was conscious of all of that already. And so much of that, I think, came from the fact that the text was there. And so the people who were drawn to it were ones who just naturally resonated with the story.
Hi, I'm reading your book or listening to it. I haven't finished it. But I love your relationship with your mother and your father, and I was just wondering what they said about the book.
I was terrified of showing them the book. In fact, when I was writing the book, and every time I thought about them reading it or responding to having it out in the world, I just could not write. I just shut down. That's why I had to keep pivoting to my judge's line about, you won't show this to anybody. It'll just be passed down to your grandchildren when you die or something. That was what got me through. So it took me 6 months to find the courage to tell my parents about the book deal after it happened. And luckily they didn't consume much social media or American media, or they would have seen it. And I'm lucky in that sense. But when I finally found the courage to tell them, those of you who have read the book will feel the pain in my heart. When I heard her say this, my mother said, "So you want the entire world to know what an awful mother I was." And that's totally understandable, because I think it's probably every parent's worst nightmare for their child to write a childhood memoir, especially to this degree. And then in Chinese culture especially, and then with my father having been from a dissident family and having been persecuted for that status, it was really triggering for them, and they were just terrified. Added on top of that was even the fear in me that once the book was out, ICE might come after us to deport us. I still thought that might happen. And I'm a lawyer. I'm supposed to understand the system and know rationally that will not happen. And I knew that rationally, but still deep down that fear lived inside, and I felt very protective of them. So I thought one way to protect them from even further fear was to keep the text of it from them, so they wouldn't know the details, like how much I shared. Maybe they thought it was just about my childhood and I didn't reveal that much about them. And so I just my mother was asking to read it from the time I told her about the deal. And I just said, oh, I don't have access to the book. So I was like, my editor's a jerk. She has it. She won't let me have, like, such a bad lie. So transparent. But my dad was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's not, I was like, great. I bought myself another,
2
9
months.
months. Yeah, exactly. So on the morning of September 7th, I presented them with the book. And when my mother opens it, she bursts into tears, just seeing it in physical form. And my dad, like me, flips to the very end, reads the last sentence. I always do that with books. And he was like, this is a good book. I like this book. the last sentence actually says, thank you, thanking my parents for giving me everything out of nothing. So I'm fortunate that was, we have planned it. But then I thought they wouldn't be able to read it. They said it's too painful for us to revisit these years. And I was like, I totally understand. I can't tell you the number of times I cried writing this book. But of course they couldn't keep themselves from reading. And later that day, my dad texted me and my husband and said, I feel healed by every page. And I'm crying into the book, but I feel a sense of healing. And so when I finally told them about the New York Times bestsellers list, sure, again, that ice might come after us. I was like, oh my God, now they definitely know about the book. My father said, good. Now there's nothing we're afraid of because it's out there. We're not waiting for anyone to out us. And I realized then that at age 34, I was still waiting for permission from my parents to feel safe. And I got it. And so now every time we get together again, it feels really like we are all lighter people because we are not tiptoeing around this past that we never let ourselves acknowledge or talk about, which is so common, especially in Chinese families. And we are free to build a new future that's not tied to these secrets.
So writing a book actually probably saves a lot of money in therapy bills too, right?
Although putting out the book required a lot of therapy.
Yeah, true. But it was all worth it.
So I really hope that, yes. Oh.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Michelle Wu is the first Asian and female mayor in Boston. What message do you want policymakers to take away from your book? And what else needs to be done for more progressive Asian Americans to make inroads in politics and in other areas of American society?
I can take the second one first because it was a very difficult thing for me to grasp when I became a litigator, which in many ways demands you to do everything that's contrary to what my Chinese mother told me and my Chinese father told me, which was to keep my head down and not draw any attention and not make any waves and not take any sides. It's just so hard to ignore that voice. It's been planted in our heads
for 34 years.
Yeah, exactly. From so early on, because for our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, that speaking up was dangerous. Like, the government would come after you and you could literally die. And I am privileged, and many of us now are privileged to not have to face those risks, but it's still hard to accept that. But going into law, going into politics requires you to take sides and stand staunchly. And Michelle's a great example of that. And we have luckily many great examples and inspirations of that, but being able to stake out a claim, even if it's not the most popular or maybe it's a new policy or idea, is crucial in making those advances and inroads in politics. And the other is coalition building. I mean, I see a lot of commonalities and in our bonds with the Black American community. And it's just that white supremacy is so embedded in our culture that Asian Americans and Black Americans are often pushed to opposite sides when we align in so many ways, and there are so many ways in which we could support each other and bolster each other. And I see a lot of strength in building bridges in that direction. There's a lot of work left to be done, and I hope to be part of that work in the future. And the first part of your question was, now I'm forgetting. I answered it. Okay, good. always want to make sure you answer the questions because in court you'll get yelled at.
So I hope all of you can really get to read the book. I think when you read the book, you will feel really touched by the book. It's really a moving book. It's only covered her 5 years of her time, from her 7 years old to like middle school, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think there's a lot more book coming out in the future. From her after middle school, there's a lot more to talk about, I'm sure. So anyway,
Parents will be excited.
I want to say, I present to you a beautiful country and a beautiful soul. Qian Julie Wang.
Thank you so much.